Hi, today we're going to explore the topic of resonance. There are all sorts of words we use to describe someone's resonance, such as placement, or timbre or color of someone's voice. Is it bright? Is it dark? Is it twangy? Is it hooty? Is it brassy? As I've mentioned in previous chapters, we're all built differently, and that also corresponds with the size and shape of our resonators. So we're all going to sound different. And what's cool about resonance is that it's one of the most changeable things about our speaking voice or singing voice. There's so many adjustments we can make to dramatically change the sound. Resonance also is affected by how we're taught to sing. Who was our teacher? What is their taste in resonance? What music do you listen to? What do you like? And does that affect your resonance? Probably. Also, what language are you singing in? We often make adjustments if we're singing in English or if we're singing in French or German or Russian, and that can really affect our resonance as well. There's an Italian term called chiaroscuro, which describes the balance between light and dark. In painting, that's exactly what it is. In singing, it's more the balance between bright and dark. In our body, we have different resonators that can access bright sounds and access darker sounds. And in singing, it's about trying to find that balance which best suits our own singing voice. There are two main types of resonators in our body. The first are called conductive resonators. And these are where we feel sensations. It's where the vibrations of the sound are being conducted through our body. So for instance, the muscles and bones in our chest and in our face and in our skull, we feel the vibrations, but we can't manipulate them. The second type of resonator groups in our body are called sympathetic resonators. And these are the resonators that we can actually control. So the first sympathetic resonator is the pharyngeal cavity, which goes from the top of the trachea up through the esophagus. The second type of sympathetic resonator is the oral cavity, which includes the soft palate, the hard palate, the lips, the tongue, the teeth, the jaw. And the third type of resonator is the nasal cavity. So going back to this idea of chiaroscuro, chiaro meaning bright and scuro meaning dark. So certain resonators can access the chiaro. And those resonators are going to be more in the front here, hard palate, which is more of a concept, but I think about bouncing the sound off of the hard palate and getting resonance off of the teeth. And that can pick up some chiaro, some brighter sounds. Also, the nasal cavity can access some very bright sounds. So when we hum or say NG or an N, we can really kind of flip the sound into the mask, and the mask being here. And this is where we feel a lot of our front resonance. As far as darker resonance, the scuro, we can access that in a few different places. The first one would be the pharyngeal cavity, and so this whole space inside of our throat, basically. And we can do that by opening our throat. The Italians call this idea gola aperta, which is open throat. And we can do that by setting an inhalation and getting a lower laryngeal position. So as I mentioned in my phonation video, you can see for here, this is the tip of my thyroid cartilage where the Adam's apple is. When I set a yawny inhalation, you can see this go down, and it descends, and that sets a lower laryngeal position, and that creates more pharyngeal space, which adds scuro into the sound. Also, by adding more space by raising our soft palate, so if you try to initiate a yawn, you can see this go down, but we're also getting a lot of space inside of our mouth, and that creates more space and adds more scuro to the sound as well. And finally, lip rounding, we can elongate the vocal tract. So I'm going to just go sideways for a second. If you think of the vocal tract here and then going through here, picking up resonance and coming out the mouth, particularly for back vowels like O and U, if we don't round our vowels, O, O, if we round our lips, we can pick up more scuro on those particular vowels. As a voice teacher, I usually try to access someone's chiaro, or their brightness, first. The reason I do that is that it takes a lot of the work out of the throat and bypasses that and really accesses our resonators here, flips the sound forward, makes singing a lot easier, and it makes our voice project more. So if we're humming on an M or an N or an NG, and we don't access our front resonators here, it's not going to project a lot. But if we access our front resonators here, I'm actually not singing any louder. It's just projecting more because I've accessed my mask. And it, like I said, it makes singing so much easier. There are certain vowels, too, that help us find our front resonance, or our chiaro. And so front vowels, which are E and A, have more natural ring to them, so it's easier to find that. So E, rather than O. Our O and U can be a little harder to find that on, and A is somewhere in the middle. Another sound, which can sound a little obnoxious, A, which has lots of front resonance to it, I find as a tenor, especially in my training, really helped me to find that ping in my voice. And so exercises with A can be really helpful. A little anecdote, I was in undergrad, it was my freshman year of undergrad, and I was in production of West Side Story. I had never been in anything before. And the director was trying to get us to project our voice, and we were in a really large hall. And everyone was doing the same exercise, which he was having us say quack. And we were trying to project that, and people were doing really well, and then it came to me, and I was like, quack, quack, and no one could hear it, and it was really embarrassing. And he kept demonstrating, then finally I just went, quack! I was like, whoa, I get it. And from that day, I never lost that resonance. That was how I learned to project and find my resonance. And so, this is a student that I did the same exercise with. And it was really helpful for him to start getting in the upper part of his voice and hooking into that resonance. So here's an example of that. Good, I think I got on an F. If you go, quack, 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 it's in the exact same place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it feels weird when you're doing it, but you can adjust the vowel so it sounds more like a singer vowel. But let's try that. Let's try that on a note lower than that.
Quack, quack, quack.
Yes, good. Try that on that.
Quack, quack, quack.
Good. Try to keep everything nice and relaxed.
Yeah.
And then let's try this on the next chart. And then keep thinking about all your support that you just really tapped into.
Quack, quack, quack.
Yes, good. Wow. How does that feel?
It feels really good. It's like when you like combining every single aspect of really, it's like I felt good.
As far as finding scuro or darkness in our sound, as I mentioned, we have different resonators in our body that can help us do that. So the pharynx are finding more pharyngeal space through a yoni inhalation. I imagine my throat, my pharynx expanding like that each time I inhale. Also, inhaling on a raised soft palate and keeping it in that position could really help create some yoni space and some scuro into the sound. If you are going to use that, just make sure that the tip of your tongue is still touching your bottom teeth. Tongue position can really affect the pharyngeal space and affect our sound and the position of the larynx. Also, lip rounding can really help elongate the vocal tract and add a little bit more scuro into our sound as well. Finally, vowel modification is a useful tool for helping to find both chiaro and scuro depending on what modification we're doing. I'm going to include vowel modification in the vocal registers chapters rather than in this one. Vowel balancing can be a useful tool in helping to find the best attributes of a front sound and a back sound, and then trying to find that middle ground. So I like to do exercises with students and myself that alternate between E and U, and finding the real buzz in the E vowel, and finding the nice open space on the U vowel, and then marrying those two perhaps on an A vowel and finding the best attributes. And so with this student, that's exactly what I'm doing. Good, all right. We're going to move to some falsetto singing. So just nice and light. We're going to start on knee. Nice and slide between the two notes. Knee with an N in that. Ready, and go. As we do this, think about how much singing into your mask you can get with your E vowel, and how much space you can get with your U vowel.
Okay.
Starting with knee, 2, ready, and. Excellent. Back on knee. A concept I've been using for years is this idea of the circle of resonance. And I imagine a hat with a brim that goes all the way around like that, and assigning numbers to the position of the brim. So for instance, if this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right around the ears, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1 being the brightest sound you can make, and 10 being the darkest sound you can make. So if we're starting on an ah vowel, and this is the brightest, ah, and it just shows you how much you can really change that. And that's a lot of that with the darkness. You can feel your soft palate raising the more you go back in that. I then use this concept when I'm working with students, and I will call out a number during an exercise, and the student will try to replicate that number. So say I'm trying to have the student experience more chiaro in their sound, I'll call out a lower number. I might call out a 1 or a 2 or a 3. If the student is trying to get more scuro in their sound, or I want them to, I'll call out a higher number. So I might call out a 8 or a 9 or a 10 and have them experience the whole gamut. And eventually we're trying to find, you know, what is best for that particular student. Where is their perfect balance? It might not be a 5, it might be a 5. Or that student's perfect balance might be a 6, or it might be a 3. And again, it might depend on what style of music they're singing, what the acoustic is like. So all sorts of factors for that. Here's a couple of exercises where I've been using this concept. 2.
If only.
So can we try on an E vowel, just this amount of music, but I want you to try singing at a 2. So it's going to be E, 1 E for each phrase. So and see if you can pop that into that really, really resonant voice. 1, 2, 3. Can you even exaggerate that more? Lots of air, those beautiful. 1, 2, 3. Quite often we have a false idea of what our voice actually sounds like. And, you know, if you've heard yourself in recordings before and you say, that doesn't really sound like me, that is because we get so used to hearing and feeling these vibrations in our skull. So if you are speaking or singing and you really pay attention, you can actually isolate and feel those vibrations. And it gives us a false idea of what our voice actually sounds like. And for singing, that can be an issue because we need to know what our voice actually sounds like. And one way to do that is to use books or anything a similar size. I'm using picture frames so that I don't infringe any copyright issues. And you put them against your ears here in front. And if you do this as an exercise, so if you're doing this at home, you know, maybe say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then put the books here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It sounds completely different. And it actually gives you a better sense of what your voice sounds like. You're hearing your voice in the room for what it actually sounds like, and you're bypassing all of these vibrations. And so for singing, it can be really, really useful in adjusting resonance. A lot of times students feel like they're singing louder or more resonant than they actually are. And as soon as they do this, I have really good results with students just immediately making a switch without even realizing that they're doing it. It's also really good for intonation issues. If a student can't hear that they're a little bit under pitch, and they do this, quite often it can fix intonation issues, which is obviously very helpful. If a voice is too bright or strident, you can warm that up by adding more scuro or darkness into the sound. The opposite, if a voice is too dark, you can balance that out by adding more chiaro into the sound, or brightness. There is a difference between a bright voice and a nasal voice. Sometimes people associate those as being the same thing. But a nasal voice has some sound coming out of the nose. And ideally, we don't want that in classical singing, except if we're singing some French sounds or M's or N's or NG's. In some pop music and in country music, sometimes that's an attribute. So it does depend on the style of music that you're singing. But if you're trying to get nasality out of your sound, just remember that it is coming out of your nose. And there are different degrees of nasality. So someone might have a lot of nasality, or someone might have just a little bit of nasality, And what you're doing when you create a nasal sound is that the soft palate and the tongue are basically meeting, and it's redirecting some of the sound out of the nose. So a fix for that is to keep your soft palate high and your tongue lower, and then the sound is going to come out of your mouth. And so one way to check on your own voice, or have your students check, if there's any sound coming out of the nose, while they're singing, have them pinch their nose intermittently, and the sound to their ears will change. And it might change to your ears if you're listening too. So if they're going, I feel a big difference when I pinch my nose. And so it's kind of a check and to see if that's happening. As I mentioned in the phonation chapter, resonance is measured by hertz, or cycles per second. When we're singing, The idea is that we want to find the partials of overtones in our voice, which are called formants, and we want to stack those on top of each other and get the most bang for the buck, basically. So we really want to find the most resonance we can, and this is what allows a solo singer to be heard over an entire orchestra. Front vowels naturally have a higher frequency level and more formants. So E and A, it's easier to get that ring. O and U, particularly, we have to work harder to find that. But it's all about finding the balance so that all of our vowels have ring. So that if we're singing over an orchestra, it's not just our E and A vowels that are going to be heard, and then the O and the U's disappear. I'm not going to get into a huge discussion on formants. If you take a vocal pedagogy course, you'll learn much more about that. When I'm warming up, and when I'm warming up singers, quite often I don't start with singing, start with stretching, but then I move to making sounds that are really helpful in finding resonance and finding that balance between breath pressure and resonance. So just simple sounds like ah, and really getting the voice moving before I even start actually singing, and then it's much easier to bring that approach into the singing voice. Here's a student that I'm working with that's doing that. Very good. All right, let's just make some tenor sounds. So, good. Ah.
Ah.
Good. Just stretch your tongue forward again, just a little bit. Good. All right. Ah.
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 Good. E.
E.
Oh.
Oh.
Good. As far as choral singing, resonance is a really interesting topic. If your choir director wants you to be really blendy, how do you do that and not sacrifice your technique? How do you not sacrifice your mask placement? And as a college undergrad voice teacher, I see high school students coming in, especially in their freshman year, and they've been singing in choir, but they have not accessed their mask because they've been told to blend. And so I think personally it's really important to warm up as a soloist before you get into your choir rehearsal so that everything's in place and you can make good decisions. If you're getting tired in choir and you feel like you're singing from your throat, it's most likely that you're trying to blend so much that you've sacrificed your mask placement. So I sing professionally in small ensembles, and sometimes I sing in larger choirs. I never ever sacrifice my mask singing. I can make it softer, I can make it somewhat less bright, but I never let the sound pop out of the mask. And I think for choral singing, that is something that sometimes we do to be too blendy. And obviously we do want to blend with our section, and we want to blend with the choir and not stick out. But there are healthy ways to do that, and there are ways that are going to tire us out. The last thing I want to talk about in relation to resonance is the speaking voice. A lot of us have professions where we use our voice all day long, and then we also are singers. And, you know, as an instrumentalist, you're not using your instrument all day long, but as singers, we quite often are. And it's very easy for our voice to get tired and to use it up too quickly. When I did my student teaching, I hadn't figured that out yet, and this is a long time ago, and I lost my voice every single day. And it was for probably three main reasons. One, I wasn't treating my speaking voice like my singing voice. I wasn't inhaling properly. I didn't plan my breaths. Sometimes I would just talk without inhaling, and that can put a lot of stress on the vocal folds. I was also speaking too low. So if I was speaking all day long, and I was speaking down here, it was really tiring out my voice. And so what I figured out was, I kind of thought of this idea of a vocal equator of where my speaking voice is. And it was too low. I raised it, and I found on a piano about where my average was, and I just started practicing speaking around there. And that my voice can dip a little bit above it, not too far below it, and it just kind of swims. And I have more inflection in my speaking voice now, probably than I used to. I probably spoke a little more monotone, which can really tire out the voice. But finding your own healthy vocal equator and swimming through that is really helpful for me. And then finally, finding my resonance in my speaking voice. Trying to project from the throat is extremely tiring, and that will tire your voice out for sure. So popping into the chiaro is super, super helpful in your speaking voice. So if I'm trying to speak from here, it gets very tired, but then if I pop things forward into my front resonance, I could speak like that all day, and it does not get tiring. And for me, that was the solution of finding my proper speaking voice and having longevity, and it's just changed my world. So I hope this is helpful for you. If you have any resonance exercises you'd like to share, please do so, and stay tuned for the next chapter, which is articulation. Thanks for watching.